Thank you. So yes, I call this talk Antipatterns for Diversity, and we will find out a little bit more about that in a second. Before I go any further, you'll notice that at the very bottom of the screen on the right, I do have a link to the slides, so you don't have to worry about this. It appears on the footer of every slide, so you can get them. I also promise you that the slides are worth next to nothing. They're just a few phrases as prompts, but there are some references in case you want to find a reference, and I have remembered to put it in there. It would be in the speaker's notes section on the Google Slides. So I want to start by stating the obvious. Humans differ in an endless number of ways. There's gender, but we also in our society, we vary by race, religion, gender identity, sexuality, nationality, class, neurodiversity, physical ability, and I could probably talk for the rest of the half hour just listing a catalog of those things. I would also put it to you that in general, we're pretty certain that diversity is good for lots of things. It's good if you're a farmer. It's good if you're an investor. It's good for populations in general. It's good for organizations in particular. It's good for problem-solving teams. It's good for businesses. It's good for communities. And I'm not making that up. Diverse teams are more adaptable, more creative, more profitable, and research has pretty much been establishing this for the past 60 years. All right, that is, just looking out over here, longer than most of us have been alive. It is also true that if we embrace diversity, that means that there are more people available to us in whatever it is we're doing. About a year ago, I went to Wikipedia and sort of figured it out. And roughly speaking, even leaving gender out of it, straight, cisgender white people make up less than 20% of the world's population. All right, if that is the only group that we're looking at, then we are by definition cutting out most of the world. We cannot afford to do that in our business in particular, since demand continues to grow. You know, in my job, I try to hire developers and technical people, and it's an impossible job. We need all of the good minds that we can get. And the final thing is there's not enough of it. There have been growing efforts at diversity in tech, and they have, in general, not always, but in general, come across as not really moving the needle very much at all. And in fact, in some cases, mid-career women in particular, were actually going in reverse. That is, women tend to leave our business mid-career at a very high rate. And in case you're thinking of obvious reasons why, no, it's not to have families. That accounts for a small portion, but compared to other industries, we are losing more than we should. Okay? And actually here, these are all from about the past 18 months. I found all of these articles, by the way, when I was actually on Google looking for somebody who was arguing that we had diversity all figured out, because I thought that would be a nice counterpoint. I didn't find that, but I found many, many, many articles like this. And this is my favorite kind of metric on sort of taking a reading on the popular culture. I did a search on Google Images, and I asked Google to show me what a programmer looks like. I have done this now several times over the past year. I did it last summer against Google UK. I did it last fall, and then again this spring against Google Poland. And then this one is from a couple of weeks ago off of the Google US main site. And you can take just a second and kind of skim through those images, and maybe you'll kind of see what I'm driving at. Almost all, we've got something like 34, 33 images up there, something like that. I don't remember the exact count. Not all of them are people, but when there is a person in the picture of a programmer, it is almost always a white male. In fact, this is maybe a backsliding from last summer when there was at least a picture of the back of a woman's head. I'll also point out down in the lower left, there is the one person of color there. He is also, I might note, the only one there who looks frustrated, confused, and angry. I can't say that I blame him. So, just before I go on anymore, I want to kind of connect these two things. First of all, we're pretty clear, or at least we should be pretty clear, that there is a definite self-interest advantage for communities, for businesses, for organizations to embrace diversity. And it seems like we're not really doing it so much. Now, here at PyCon, we could argue that we have actually made somewhat of a difference. And I know I talked to a friend yesterday who had not been to PyCon for a couple of years, and he was amazed at the diversity that we had. And I think we should genuinely be proud of that. We are kind of a model for the rest of the tech world. When people talk about diversity, they always say, and PyCon. But there are a couple of things going on with that. One of them is that I don't think that we are there yet, honestly. And the other thing is I can also tell you that being accepted 1 week out of the year is really not a good way to live your life. So we do have a lot to do, and I would just kind of invite you. I'd originally thought I would turn this into an audience participation thing, and then I decided, no, that actually is kind of depressing. So who here has felt, and just think about this yourself, has felt, in the technical world, in open source communities, in the Python world, in your job, wherever it might be, that you've been marginalized for who you are? I mean, I will admit I have. Who here has seen it happen to someone else? Again, I will admit that I have. Who here has spoken up or done something to stop it? I wish I had done it more. So I think we have some things going on there. And so as I continue to sort of think about this, why aren't we doing better? It struck me that in comparison, what we do as a tribe is solve problems. We like to fix things. We like to point out what is broken and fix it. I can't tell you how many conversations I've heard and taken part of just in this week, pointing out that's the problem with that library, that's what's broken there, we need to fix it. People have even helpfully pointed out things to me that are wrong with the PSF. We like to do that. And it's good that we like to do that because sometimes what we're doing wrong does matter as much as what we're doing right. And that makes me wonder, why aren't we doing it here? What are the anti-patterns? What are the things that are helping us shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to increasing diversity throughout our tech communities? So you'll notice I've been using the pronoun we, and that's a very intentional choice. I want to be clear because this is kind of an occupational hazard of talking about this. I'm not trying to single out a group and say, you are the reason we don't have diversity. This is something that applies to all of us because every single one of us, no matter what kind of marginalization or what kind of discrimination we personally may be facing, are still capable of turning around and excluding someone else. We all have this problem. Just because I am a transgender woman, I cannot then say I somehow have a past and I cannot possibly do something to someone else. In fact, I can't even claim for sure that I am not practicing transphobia and misogyny. It is quite possible that that could happen. We all have this as our problem. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done, and I've given this talk in several variations, and every single one is completely different. So this is not meant to be some grand unified theory. This is just sort of a grouping that I think makes sense for this audience. So one thing that and what I will do is I'll kind of call out what I see as the issue, maybe give an illustration or two, and then maybe a suggestion or two of what to think about. People quite often want a whole detailed guide. You do this, do this, do this, do this. I cannot give that to you. So the first thing is actually even seeing or admitting the problem. And on the one hand, if someone tells me that, I've benefited from some sort of discrimination or some sort of exclusion of someone else, I really don't want to know that because it makes me feel bad. We all have this kind of response. So that's part of it. But the other part of it, much, much more real, is that if it is a problem that doesn't affect you, it becomes very, very, very hard to see. I'm going to tell you a couple of little illustrations of this. The first one was when I was much, much younger. I was teaching at an international school in Athens, Greece, a long time ago. And I was assigned, as a fairly young teacher, to actually fit out and equip a new lecture and exam room. Because we hadn't had one, we actually found a space. So I was the one charged with buying the furniture and getting the board and getting a carpet and getting all set up. Why they chose me, I honestly have no idea. I think no one else wanted to do it. But it was presented as, oh, here, this is your opportunity. So I took it. And we set it up. I thought it was really well done. Till we got to the next teacher meeting, and our teacher speaks up, and he says, I would like to know why this administration is embracing dextrism. I really hadn't thought about that. The art teacher, of course, was left-handed. I bought little exam desks with the little folding desk. I'm right-handed. I didn't even think about what a pain in the rear it is to take a test on one of those little desks when you're left-handed. The art teacher was really ticked off that I hadn't thought of this, and he was right to be, but it was something that I didn't even know about. Okay? Of course, I've remembered it all these years, so he did make his point. And the other thing I can tell you is that, and I've mentioned this before I transitioned, I really tried to imagine, I really tried to think about the differences in being in the world perceived as a man versus being perceived as a woman. I thought about it, I talked to people, and I will promise you, I did not see everything until I actually did make that change. You just cannot see what does not directly affect you. So, this is a hard one. What you have to do is be aware that this is a problem. You have to question the privilege that you've got. And if any of you out there think that you don't have privilege, I promise you you're wrong. Think again about that. And be sure to actually listen to feedback you get from others. This is something, it's kind of like one of these mysterious phenomena that you can't observe directly. So you need to look for the signs that this might be from another thing. I mean, for example, a privilege that I tend not to think about is that I'm a native English speaker. In our business, English is the default language. As I've worked internationally, it doesn't matter if I don't speak somebody's language, it matters if they don't speak mine. That is a privilege. Another thing we tend to do is talk a lot about the bloody pipeline. And it's not that we have, that this isn't an issue, it is. But when we talk about the pipeline, we can then kind of shift the blame and say the education system isn't training enough people, there aren't enough role models. It's a great way to kind of push things away and not face some issues that are closer to home. And in fact, I think that the pipeline is not one of our main problems. I think that what needs to be done here is to look a lot harder from other sources. Again, if you're hiring, don't just trust what the recruiters send you. All of them are doing the exact same LinkedIn search. If you do find somebody, maybe they don't match what HR has as the checklist of things, but interview them if you think they can do the job. And you know, I want to consider actually hiring somebody too. And this was a tweet from someone I know who was like, so you want to have more people of color in your business? Well, why don't you hire one? Because in fact, this isn't a pipeline problem. People of color are graduating with CS degrees at twice the rate they can get hired. It's not a very big rate. Indeed, we could do better there. But we're not even taking advantage of what the pipeline gives us. So I like this illustration, and that's why I threw it in there. It's not only a leaky pipeline. We've got to overhaul the entire plumbing system. And this kind of gets to the nub of it. I think we're actually focusing on diversity as opposed to inclusion. We're focusing on getting the mix of the specific characteristics rather than getting a system that works well together, rather than having people feel that they are a part of the system. And by that, you know, the official diversity numbers we get all focus on intake. This is, again, just sort of building on the pipeline notion. If you want to get a counterpoint from just intake, go search the Twitter hashtag real diversity numbers if you haven't already. It hit last summer and was kind of celebrated for several months because people were tweeting basically real diversity questions that they had. So I want a real diversity number. How many more hours does a black woman engineer need to work to get the same promotion? That would be a real diversity number. Things like that. So I think we need to focus more on retention and promotion, not just can we hire them, but can somebody different actually feel included enough that they will stay and that they will grow? Okay? If we're hiring equal numbers of men and women, but after 3 years the men are getting promoted to senior developer and the women it takes 5, we've got a problem. It doesn't matter that we've got the intake numbers equal. We also tend to forget that diversity has a lot of different dimensions and that these dimensions can intersect. So if you hear people talking about intersectionality, that's what they're talking about. And what that means is that these effects can multiply if you're affected on different axes. For example, I am a transgender person, I am a woman. Those are two things that people, particularly these days, of course, use against me. All right? However, if you were to add to that being a person of color, being young, being uneducated, maybe you're not having a job, then you're talking about a life expectancy that is less than 35 years. You're talking about people killing you. That's a way to think about intersectionality. These things multiply. Now, we need to think about this in terms of the fact that just giving the same level of support to everybody may, in some sense, just not be fair. If you have to deal with one or two of these things, you may need one level of support. If you actually have to deal with several of these things, you may need other levels of support. You may need more flexibility. You may need more considerations in safety. There may be other things to think about. And if you're trying to bring people in that are different, which again is a benefit to your organization, whatever it might be, you need to think about how you're going to support that. And again, we don't think about what it costs to be excluded, to be one of these people that is coming in, to give your organization this diversity, this different viewpoint that is actually of a benefit to you. And this may be costs that are as simple as just daily having to put up with insinuations that you are different, that you are not the same, that you are maybe not quite as good. So here's your XKCD comic, just so that you can get a little relief there. So we need to think about that as well. In other words, how does the culture of your organization, your group, your business treat people who are different? Do you assume that everybody does the same thing to have fun? Do you assume that everybody has the same background, the same family, the same religion, the same whatever? And if they don't, is that a disadvantage? How does that work in your culture? Also, Quite often, and I can tell you this from my experience as well, we tend to put the burden of handling, of solving, of improving diversity on the people who are marginalized. In other words, let's call the woman, minority person, LGBT person, and have them sort out this diversity thing. Okay, I know some specifics, it's like, oh, you're the minority, do the diversity stuff. It happens to me. Many of us are willing to do this. Certainly I spend a fair amount of time doing this, but this is emotional labor that takes away from the time that you could do other things. All right? That means that when performance reviews come around, you've been spending all of your time on diversity, the other person has just been doing their work, who gets a better performance review? That means that really, if you are serious about this, you, as in whatever role you might have, need to take the lead and be an ally, or, as I prefer, co-conspirator. Ally is this sort of detached thing. I want you in there with me. So co-conspirator is the way I like to think about that. And you need to do that even when the people who are affected are not around. I spent decades, as one of my students put it, undercover as a straight white male. In that time, as I've said before, I never saw a man attack sexism when there were no women around. I never saw a cisgender person speak out against transphobia when there were no trans people around. Okay, I hope that has changed. It has been a few years now since I lost that visibility, but that is when it really matters. So here, yes, I actually love this picture. Getting somebody who is different there does give you a benefit. Just exploiting that benefit strikes me as deeply wrong. And besides, with Rudolph, they never tell you what happened to Rudolph next year when the skies were clear. I want to know that story. So, in kind of wrapping this up, my plea is don't do diversity in that sort of, for want of a better word, self-centered, exploitive way. Respect that the people you are bringing in who are different are taking a risk, are perhaps paying a cost to be there, and they are giving you something of value. Respect that. If you want people who are different to be involved, the best way that you can convince them that you're serious is to tell them, is to talk to them directly. And this, whether you're a conference, a club, whatever, making contact and talking to people directly is the best way that you can do that. It's a lot more work, but it is more effective. If you want to know whether or not something you're doing is bad for a particular group, for a particular person, you should ask them. And when they tell you, you should actually listen. The second part seems to get lost a certain amount. You should educate yourself rather than expecting everyone else to educate you. So, of course, use Google. Use it a little bit critically, but still. Because I think no matter who we are, if we want to include different people in our organizations, in our groups, in our communities, in our businesses, that necessarily means that we have to change some things that we do, all of us. But I guess I am an optimist at the end of it all. I think we actually can do that. So that is what I've got for you. Thank you very much. No.
Okay, let's thank Naomi again. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that you would be happy to answer some questions.
Absolutely.
Just afterwards. Okay,
Afterwards,
thank you very much.
right. Mm-hmm.